What are you saying, geezers? It's Spessy here. Today we are looking at all the nerfs I would like to see in Marvel Snap. I'm expecting a big balance change coming on the 31st of January when we get the battle mode patch and the big downgrade of cards happens. Zabu is the first card. This card needs a massive nerf, and I think it's quite simple. I think Zabu going to 4 energy would be a really nice way of handling this card, because you can still go Psylocke in turn 2 into still playing Zabu on turn number 3. So the deck would still be very, very strong indeed. We all know if you play Zabu on turn 4, it's still pretty good, to be completely honest with you. And the fact that you could Psylocke into this and still play it on turn 3, I think it's just a no-brainer change. I think it could keep the same power and just go to 4 energy. I still think the deck would be pretty damn strong. I don't think it would be overdoing it too much, because of course it's pretty risky territory nerfing a Battle Pass card, but I feel like Second Dinner have given themselves no choice. This card is completely busted. 4 cost would be a start. I wouldn't be surprised if it would need to get nerfed further down the line. And next we have the other card which I think needs the biggest nerf in the game, and that's Aero. This card recently went from 8 power down to 7. Nowhere near enough. Second Dinner, I think, have been bamboozled a bit, because Aero in beta did cost 6 energy for a while and she saw no play. But I think that's just because people didn't realize how strong she was. Her ability is what's so powerful about her, being able to drag your opponent's cards into a certain lane. If you're going into turn 6 winning, you can play Aero into the location you're losing and just pull all their stats into that location. And her power, therefore, is irrelevant a lot of the time. So the fact that she's got such a big body as well is quite incredible. I think the fact that you can play Aero and a card like Titania or a card like Miles on turn 6 is really underestimated. The card has to go to 6 energy in my opinion, and I honestly think it could go to 6 energy, it could lose a point, and it would still see play. So I think to start off with, just making it 6 energy, keep it at 7 power, I think that would be a good start, but I would be honestly concerned that it wouldn't be enough. I think it's really easy to underestimate how strong this card is. I think it is without doubt, apart from Zabu, the strongest card in the game, the most overtuned. So 6 energy minimum. I think this does not deserve to be a 5 energy card. Its ability is so powerful. Up next we have Galactus, and Galactus is a really tricky one to decide how to nerf. It is a card I really don't like. I think it's very interesting, and I very much doubt it's going to get a full rework with how, it's very impactful, just destroying the whole board. I think it's a very cool card. There's a key thing that needs to change here for me, and that is its interaction with Death and Null. So Death here, if you're not familiar, cards cost 1 less for each card destroyed this game. I think Marvel Snap needs to introduce a new keyword, maybe call it Banish, that's what it's called in Gwent, where Galactus would say, destroy all other locations, or remove other locations from the game and banish all cards. So there would be a distinction between Banish and Destroy. That would then mean that you can't play Death for nothing the turn after you Galactus, unless you've played like a Killmonger, of course, or something to set it up. It would also mean that you can't just slam a Null for a load of points. The other thing this would change is the Yondu interaction. So if this was to change, Yondu would probably need to get buffed in some way or reworked. Because at the moment, Yondu destroys the top card of the deck, and that removes the counter from Death. I don't think that should ever happen. It always felt a bit off to me anyway, to be completely honest. So I think Galactus, therefore, would be a lot more balanced. You'd still be able to win cubes with it. You could Galactus on turn number 4 with Wave, and then Spider-Man on turn 5, for example. You can do things like Shang-Chi. There's still many things like Sabretooth and all those kinds of things. The deck would become a lot more difficult to win with, a lot less frustrating to play against, and there would probably be a lot more counterplay. As it stands, the card is super unhealthy, and I do think the main cause of that is its interaction with Death. And in general, Death as well, we've seen with like locations like Lamentis 1. I think Lamentis 1 should just be banishing both players' decks, not destroying them. So then cards like Null don't just play for 1,000,000 points. I think it's a little bit ridiculous, so that's what I would like to see get changed. Next we have Shuri. Shuri, one of the most powerful Series 5 cards, going down to Series 4. She's 4 cost, and there is a problem with this, which is that her being 4 cost can enable a lot of very powerful combos. You can play Shuri on turn 4, skip turn 5, and then play She-Hulk Taskmaster for 20 points each. You can even, if you play like a Psylocke or a Zabu, get Wong and Shuri down by turn 4, and then play a She-Hulk and a Taskmaster for 40 points each on turn 6 in different locations. Overall, she's enabling a lot of unhealthy combos. There's a lot of things you could do to her. You could make her negative points, for example. You could change her ability completely. For me, I think the obvious fix is making her 5 energy. Because I just think if you make her less power, like -1, she's still going to be really strong. Like her power's kind of irrelevant to some extent with how big the numbers are. But making her 5 energy is going to make her more awkward to just combo in ridiculous ways, right? You're going to be able to play Shuri on 5 and then Red Skull on 6, and then the Taskmaster's not there. You're still going to be able to pull it off. You would just need to add a card like Wave and Psylocke to the combo, which makes it a lot more difficult to pull off consistently. And of course, if you play a card like Wave into Shuri, then your opponent's getting to play a 6-cost card. So I think making Shuri 5-cost is pretty much the only way of keeping her ability balanced. And I think just lowering her power is not going to do it, even if you make her negative points. We have Silver Surfer next, another controversial Battle Pass nerf, because people are paying for this card, so to nerf it is a problem. I've seen a lot of people in my chat say that Brood needs to get nerfed, and I think that's a really bad take. If you look at the card Brood, how could you nerf it? You could increase its energy and power. There's just no clean fix. The numbers in Marvel Snap are very small, right? So you can make it 2 cost and 1 power. Well, that would be garbage. You could make Brood 4 cost and 3 power, and that would be too strong. Or you can make it 5 cost and 4 power, and then it's just a completely different card and a bit ridiculous. So Silver Surfer definitely the card that needs to get nerfed, in my opinion. If you look at a card like Ironheart is a pretty similar card. 0 stats, 3 energy, plays for 6 points. Silver Surfer only needs 2 3-cost cards to play for 6. So if you have 3 3-cost cards, it's already 9 points for 3, which is massively above curve. Especially when you consider it's 0 points in its own location, and it's like a location you're going to lose most likely, and it's boosting your locations which have got 4 cards in. I think the obvious answer for Silver Surfer is keep the energy the same, increase its base power by a point or 2, and change its ability to buffing 3-cost cards by 2. If you just, let's say hypothetically we keep it at 0 points, and it's buffing everything by 2, you would need 3 3-cost cards for it to play for 6 points. If you have 4 3-cost cards, it plays for 8 points. Now, I think probably what you would do is you would add a point to its body as well. Perhaps 2. I think 1 would be fine, honestly. So let's say it's got a 1 body. Then you would need to hit 4 3-cost cards for it to play for 9 points, which is really powerful and seems pretty reasonable to me. Perhaps you make it 2 power. I think the clear answer, though, is this card should stay at 3 cost, because then you can play 2 3-cost cards on turn 6 or 3 3-cost cards on turn 6 with Sarah. So I don't see changing the energy being reasonable. Just give it a point or 2 and change its ability to buffing everything by 2 power instead. Up next, a controversial one, Sunspot. Not a card a lot of people are calling out to get nerfed. When I was talking with my chat about this, though, I do tend to agree. I think Sunspot should be 0 points. It's a little bit too good as a 1-cost card. It's just very easy to include. I think making it 0 points, it will still see play. So if it's still seeing play, when it loses a point, it should probably get nerfed. Another one that's going to be controversial, but one that I think is going to be really important. I don't expect this to get reworked, but I very much doubt in a year's time this card will have the same ability. Mr. Negative, 4 energy minus 1 points. On reveal, swap the power and cost of all cards in your deck. A lot of you will know I actually just hate this card in general, because on the final turn, you just don't know what your opponent has. They might have drawn an Iron Man for 5 stats and 0 cost. They might have a Mystique, which costs them nothing and has 3 stats as well, which they can then copy Iron Man. And it's just a little bit ridiculous. It just kind of turns into a fold if your opponent has this card and you just guess what they have. It's very frustrating to play against. But most importantly, this card is really limiting the design space in the future. Every time you look at a card like Shuri or Leader, where you want to nerf perhaps its points, you have to think, oh, but then it's going to be really strong in a Mr. Negative deck. And that is going to be a big problem for balance moving forwards. So I just genuinely don't like the design of the card and the gameplay, but also the fact that it's limiting design space. I do think this card needs a complete rework in the future. I don't expect it to happen anytime soon, but I do think it's inevitable. Up next, Darkhawk, 4 energy, 1 stat. Important to mention that if Zabu's getting a significant nerf, Darkhawk maybe doesn't. There's a couple ways, though, that you can deal with Darkhawk in terms of its power level, because I think it's a little bit overtuned even without Zabu. One way is lower its power to begin with, so you can make it maybe -1 to start off with, or you could lower the scaling and make it buff by 1 for every card in your opponent's deck. I think it would be much more reasonable to just lower its points. So maybe it starts at 0 points or -1. Again, I think Zabu getting a significant nerf is the most important thing to keep Darkhawk in check. We have Shang-Chi next, another controversial one. I think Shang-Chi is too strong. There was a Second Dinner mentioned recently that Shang-Chi is the card which has like the lowest win rate or something like that in players' decks. And while that kind of makes sense because Shang-Chi is going to whiff a lot of the time, it's going to be playing for nothing, you just don't play it. A lot of the time it's just winning 8 cubes. I think there's a couple things that you could do with Shang-Chi. I think first and foremost, you could make it 5 energy. Okay, that would also be a nerf to Zabu, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think, realistically, you play Shang-Chi on turn 6 anyway. A lot of the time, when you nerf a card by 1 energy, that is a huge deal. But with Shang-Chi, I don't think it's as big of a deal because usually it's a card you play on turn 6. So instead of being able to play Shang-Chi in a 2-cost card, you just can play Shang-Chi in a 1-cost card, which I think is more than reasonable. The other things you could do, you could lower its power by 1 or 2. You could also change its ability entirely. Maybe you could increase it to 10 or more power, for example. You could also make it so it destroys your cards at that location, which are 9 power or more. You can make it just kill one thing. Overall, for me, I would just like to see it either change its power, maybe make it 2 power, or make it 5 energy. I think either of those are fine. I actually think it would probably be better to make it 5 energy, because I don't think this card synergizing with Zabu is necessarily a healthy thing overall. But I'm pretty easy on this one. I do think Shang-Chi should get some kind of nerf. 1 energy, 1 power. I don't really think it makes a big deal either way. I think probably 1 energy would be my choice though. Leader up next. Leader, I honestly don't think is too far away from being reasonable. I think making it 2 stats or 1 stat would be good. Again, the big problem with making it less than that is Mr. Negative. I think 1 power for leader for me would be what I would go for, but I wouldn't be too unhappy to see it just go to 2 power. I know that's going to be controversial for a lot of people, but I really do think this card is a pretty healthy card in terms of its ability. The main issue is like just its power is too high because you can use it to get ahead in a location, and then that's all that matters. Whereas if you make it 1 power, you really do need to have a pretty big advantage going into the final turn. Scorpion up next, I think is a pretty simple one. I think you can just make it 1 power, and I think that's going to keep this card in check. It should still be pretty solid. Next, a very controversial one, my favorite card in the game. I think this card is massively, massively busted, but I'm very much in the minority there. I think this card should be 7 power. I think it needs a 2-stat nerf. I think you need to be really heavily punished for ever playing America Chavez because of how powerful her ability is. I would still play this card in quite a lot of decks if she had minus 1,000,000 points. Because it's not her, she's not so powerful because of her stats, she's so powerful because of her ability. So the fact that her ability is so strong where you don't have to play her, she's making the rest of your deck stronger in a lot of ways. Your deck is more consistent, you're drawing your cards on curve more frequently. I think that the fact that you can also play her and she's pretty okay, I would like to see her get nerfed. Of course, if you put her to 8 stats, it's worth mentioning that she's out of Shang-Chi range. But if you actually think of how often America Chavez is getting Shang-Chi'd, it's very rare anyway. So I do think it would be incorrect to label that as a buff. But because she is out of Shang-Chi range, that's why I maybe pitched 7 power instead of 8. I really think this card is busted, but it's not going to get nerfed. Our next, Magneto, another controversial one. Magneto is a really good card at farming 8 cube victories because of being able to move cards to its location. It has the same base power and stats as Hulk right now. I don't think it would be a bad idea to buff Hulk up to 13, but then Giganto is quite close, and Giganto feels pretty balanced. So I think Hulk at 12 is fine. I think Magneto could just come down to 11 points, and it would still see a whole lot of play. Leech, another controversial one. I really like Leech. I don't think it needs nerfed particularly. I don't think there's a big problem, though, with just kicking a point off of it and putting it at 2 power, particularly because a lot of the time you're playing Leech into a lockjaw lane. I think that you could pretty much nerf Leech by a point and it would be good. I love how this card was seen as being trash, and suddenly it's just a really top meta card. I love this card. Very healthy for the game. Lockjaw up next, another controversial one. I think it could go to 1 power. I don't expect it to happen, but when I just look at this card, I do think it's a little bit stronger than it needs to be. I think 1 power would be more than reasonable, to be completely honest. Cosmo up next. Cosmo, I'm not a huge fan of nerfing. I do think that Silver Surfer nerf would keep this in check, but also I think you could just put it to 2 stats, and I don't think there would be a big problem. It's still going to see play. I think Cosmo is a really healthy card. It is pretty difficult to use, which maybe people are going to disagree with me on that one, but I think it's a pretty high skill ceiling card where you can try and get initiative and predict your opponent's plays. I don't think it deserves a rework. I think 3 energy is great. I think synergizing with Surf is great. But I think just 2 stats would probably be reasonable. Quite similarly, Killmonger, the same thing really. I think 2 stats would be pretty reasonable. Again, worth bearing in mind if Silver Surfer catches a big nerf, I would be pretty happy to keep these cards as they are. I think they're getting a little bit more out of control in Silver Surfer decks. But of course, both of these two cards do see play outside of Silver Surfer. Also, a bit of an honourable mention to Maximus, who is 7 stats for 3. He could maybe get nerfed as well. I think he's a little bit more difficult to nerf, though. I think making him 6 power, he's probably seeing very little play. He's just going to be like much worse than a card like Mr. Fantastic. I think maybe Maximus is fine. There just needs to be maybe a few more cards at 3 costs could come closer to playing for 7 stats, like Captain America, the Punisher, these kinds of things. So I haven't included Maximus in this list, but I do want to give it an honourable mention. I'm going to be doing a video on buffs I'd like to see as well, so make sure you subscribe for that. If you watched this far, thanks so much. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and see you on the next one. Let me know in the comments, is there any cards you disagree with my takes on? Is there any cards that I didn't mention that you would like to see get nerfed? Thanks so much for watching, and see you soon.